Looking to build your team's capability in service design, research, or human-centered design or service design and AI courses? This is HCD offers practical, hands-on training for organizations, tailored to your context, not off the shelf. Teams at Verizon, AIB, Flutter, AccentureSong, Gusto, local government, government departments, and NGOs across Europe have all leveled up through these programs. To explore what's possible for your team, book a free 15-minute call. See the link in the show notes to find out more. Now let's get back to that episode.
Hey folks, and welcome back to another episode of This is HCD. My name is Gerry Scullion and I'm a human-centered service designer based in the beautiful city of Dublin, Ireland. Now, today in the show, I'm delighted to welcome Caroline Jarrett. Caroline has been one of the people that I wanted to have on this podcast for a very long time. I was first introduced to Caroline's work by the brilliant Gerry in Melbourne, whom I worked with way back in another lifetime when I lived in Australia. We caught up when we were both speaking at SD and Gov in Edinburgh last year, and truthfully we actually did an episode there, but the noise of the crowd and stuff walking by was just too distracting to publish, so we redid it again, and I'm delighted to have her on the show to share with you today. Now, here's the thing. It's a question that I've been sitting with for quite a while. What's the point of plugging your organization into AI if the data you're feeding it is already broken? And that's the thread that we spoke about, myself and Caroline, a number of weeks ago. For anyone who doesn't know Caroline is a forms expert, a surveys expert, and one of the sharpest observers I've ever come across in the field. Caroline has been quietly working on glamorous bits of design over the last 30 years, forms, errors, data quality, the stuff that doesn't really get to trend on LinkedIn, but Caroline is there when you've got a question about this stuff. They have done the hard work. Now, in this conversation, we talk about why forms are the only compulsory part of any service, and why so many teams can't tell you their own error rates, and what designers should be doing right now before the AI conversation outpaces the reality on the ground. Before we get into it, I just want to give a shout out to my own newsletter on This is HCD. We have totally redesigned thisishcd.com. There's now a live directory where you can join and connect with other designers. We're very proud of it. It's not something we've bought off the shelf. It's something that we have built through research. We are walking the walk and talking the talk. Really, this conversation is about garbage in, garbage out, the data problem hiding inside your AI strategy. Caroline is brilliant. If you haven't connected with Caroline on LinkedIn, go ahead and do it. They're absolutely fantastic just to learn from asynchronously. But also, if you want to engage with Caroline, go direct to her. She is fantastic. She's got an absolute wealth of information that she can amplify any team on this planet with that information with. Let's jump straight into this episode. Caroline, I'm delighted to have you on the podcast. Long time admirer. Second time speaking. The first time we met and in person and connected was in Service Design and Gov in Edinburgh in 2015. And we're doing this podcast again because we weren't really I wasn't too happy with the audio quality. And we recorded it in one of the lobbies. But maybe we'll start off. Tell us a little bit about yourself, where you're from and what you do.
Well, I'm right here. I'm in Leighton Buzzard, which is a little town in the UK. Probably no one's ever heard of it. And the name is as silly as it sounds. I mean, the buzzard is spelt like the bird. Yeah. Apparently, it's an ancient Norman name. It's a corruption of bossard. But I prefer to think of, raptors flying around.
That's it.
And actually, these days, we don't have any buzzards, but we do have a lot of red kites, which are very beautiful birds. They've become very common in my area of the UK. For people who don't know the country that well, about 40 miles northwest of London, or another way of looking at it is halfway between Oxford and Cambridge. I'm not really from here, but for complicated reasons, my husband and myself ended up buying a house in this town in 1985, and heavens above, more than 40 years later, we're still here. We still
Happy
like
days.
it, and that's my background. And so, what do I do? Is that through a combination of sort of random things, I ended up in the 1992, ended up getting a job with what was then called Bull Information Systems. It's now called Stereo. And they delivered PCs to our tax authorities, now called HMRC, for His Majesty's Revenue and Customs, but in those days it was the Inland Revenue. And they have about 26,000 staff. So it was a lot of PCs. And they also delivered the Unix systems they connected to. And they decided that, the revenue decided that they would try and scan forms. So instead of typing in the tax forms, they wanted to scan them in and have what we now call artificial intelligence, so neural network image recognition, to process the forms. And they'd actually delivered a couple of systems and it wasn't going well. And they hired me. I was project manager. They hired me to try and turn it around. And I did a couple of visits to the sites where these things were working and not working.
Yeah.
And one of them was for a form where people would have the opportunity, if they paid at the time any sort of bank interest was taxable. And people could reclaim the small amounts of tax if they weren't a sufficient taxpayer to have this tax. So basically, it didn't work. And it didn't work because people would write things on the form like, please see letter attached. Right. And roll forward. I mean, I'm talking about 1992 and we're now 2026, I think. And where artificial intelligence is everywhere, isn't it?
Yeah.
But I can tell you for sure that your artificial intelligence today still can't deal with a form where someone's said, please read letter attached.
I know.
So I got very interested in, well, how do we design forms so that people actually write processable answers on them? And it's kind of a passion that's never let me go. I still really find forms very fascinating. So that's me in a nutshell.
No, absolutely. I need to give a shout out to Gerry Gaffney in Melbourne, who I've worked with, when I lived in Australia for a couple of years. And Gerry kind of introduced me to an awful lot of the work that he and you had done in that first book, which I have no idea how many years ago that was, but it's now a collector's edition, is what he likes to tell me. But,
well, I see. I've managed to position my forms book just so you just can't see it behind my head.
I see it, in the background there.
Yeah, that's Gerry and me. We met sort of online. We were both members of a do you remember in the days when we used to have email communities? Mailing lists, yeah. So we were both on that, and we started chatting about forms. And he was interested in writing a book on forms, and I twisted his arm to help me write a book on forms. And a mere 10 years later, the book came out.
A great combination.
But, I really valued his contributions to the book. And yeah, he's a great guy.
So, like, I know you said to me before we were chatting, I said, I can't believe you keep on referring to me as a forms expert and a surveys and all of these different aspects. But you have written 2 books, and one of them is titled Forms at Work. So that's maybe
I'm
where
more than happy to be referred to as a forms person. That's my ideal identity. But what happens is that one thing led to another, and I ended up writing a book on surveys. Sort of accidentally wrote a book on surveys because, broadly speaking, I mean, you can see a few bookshelves behind me, and I've got pretty much one bookshelf that's full of survey stuff, right? And I've got about 3 books on forms. You know, the number of books on forms around is really, really small. When my book came out, people, when they heard, oh, you've written, you're a forms person, people would very, in a lovely way, suggest to me I should read Luke Wroblewski's book on forms, which is also good. And I would just smile politely because I'm a smile politely sort of person. But they hadn't noticed I actually contributed a perspective to that book.
Yeah.
So it's like, but there's only perhaps 10 or 15 books around on forms. Another one's been written by Jessica Enders, who's also Australian, like Gerry. But surveys is the opposite. There's an absolute constant survey literature. And of course, the survey people are also interested in some of the things that matter for forms, like how do people answer a question,
Yeah.
So there's a torrent of survey stuff. It's absolutely impossible to keep up. I went to the European Survey Research Association, has a conference every 2 years, and they would have something like 300 papers at that conference. That's just one conference every 2 years, and that's just to give you a flavour. And then another one is that one of the most cited papers in all of academia is Likkert's famous paper on measuring attitudes, which is from 1932. And, 100 years later, that's still a very, very highly cited. So it's not only a massive volume of stuff, but it's also very, very historic. So, I ended up reading a lot about surveys. And then my mentor, Ginny Reddish, told me I had to write a book on surveys. So I said, yes, Ginny, and wrote a book on surveys. And I won't say I mind when people ask me about surveys, but I'm not as passionate about them as forms.
I know, but in terms of, we'll focus on forms first, okay? Because some people will use them interchangeably. Like, say, a form and a survey, like, they go hand in hand. People who may not be from the industry, maybe they are from the industry. I'd like to understand a little bit more from a conversation that I had with Gerry Gaffney. And that was probably in 2017 when I was kind of starting this podcast, to be honest. And Gerry was likening forms to being like a conversation between people, but being able to identify from the forms that an organization produces what he can derive that the organization is like. What are your thoughts on that in the current world of 2026? Where do you see the same patterns, and how is it manifesting in what organizations are producing? What are the problems they're producing at the moment when they're creating their forms?
Well, I think I have a diagram on my website that was created by Tim Paul, who's very used to be head of interaction design at gov.uk, and he's now working in artificial intelligence for our government. And his diagram has got like a series of mountain peaks with the little red peaks peeking up are the forms, and everything else underneath is the service. And there's only teeny tiny little red peaks, And most of us working in user experience, we spend most of our time not on the forms, right? But the forms are the little peaks that people actually see. That's the only compulsory part. So I'll see, enormous amounts of stuff about all sorts of things to do with website design, experience design, everything about interacting with customers. But it's actually the forms of the compulsory bit. That's the bit that you can't escape. You have to do it. And one of the main differences for me between a form and a survey is that, broadly speaking, a form is something you have to do, whereas a survey is something you can opt out of. So form is often a barrier between someone trying to get something done and getting something done. And so if organizations can kind of make those barriers almost feel invisible, then that's going to be better for everybody. Somebody asked me about, well, should you want to delight people with forms? And my answer to that is, well, I think you should probably kind of try, hugging a loved one or going for a walk in the fresh air for your delight, and try and give people time back to use for their delight in the way they want to by making their forms experience be as fluid and easy and almost unnoticeable as possible.
Do you see any kind of shift in improvement with the advent of AI in forms design? Because, apparently some people out there, maybe they're in design, maybe they're not. They're speaking about, AI is going to change everything. We're able to produce forms and websites. And, what's it like from your perspective when you look at the web now? What are the glaring risks that you see that are staring us in the face with the advent of AI?
I think one of the things I'm noticing more and more is kind of where many of us already rely on some level of agentic AI, which is to say AI that does stuff for you. Okay. So there's a type of agentic AI that's been around for quite a long while, which we know as autocorrect.
Yeah.
Okay, that's an agentic AI, and many of us have been embarrassed in some way by autocorrect doing something. Typically, I think many of us have the experience that practically every day autocorrect does something silly for us.
Yeah.
If I'm just sending a text to my husband, like what time's dinner, does it really matter when it sends what banana dinner or something random? I mean, why does it insert these words? But it does. Doesn't really matter. But in terms of having that sort of stuff in something that really matters can be quite worrying.
Yeah.
And then the next level of agentic AI that many of us are also very, very familiar with and rely on, which in fact, just logging in today, my browser suggested some stuff for me to log into. Now, if I hadn't been deliberate, when it asked me for a name to put into your, logging in, my browser suggested some names. Now, it suggested some names which are appropriate. I want it to be known as the name I usually use, like Caroline Jarrett. But because in this country we still use, like, I call myself Mrs. Caroline Jarrett, I prefer to be known by that title, it will suggest that. But also it suggests some names, like, for example, I used to do a lot of paperwork for my late parents, so it's got my parents' names. Now, I had to be on top of that and making choices to, even in that tiny trivial thing. So one of the things I think many of us experienced has been our browsers are quite handy for doing that kind of filling in for us. But we've also accidentally polluted that stuff with perhaps a typo or something.
Yeah.
So you can end up propagating a mistake. And many of us, I mean, myself included, I'm sure I could work out how to eliminate that crud that my browser has accumulated, but I can't quite be bothered.
Yeah.
And I'm someone, I've worked in and around computers since 1977. Do you know what I mean? I've got a long experience of this. You think a lot of people my age and older wouldn't even begin to know where to start on doing that. And a lot of young people are just like, their computers are as natural as breathing to them, but they still may not know things like how to eliminate that crud. So now we're looking, saying, well, those are two AI agents that many of us just use all the time, but we know they're problematic. If we then say, well, we're going to hand over to AI a bit more and say, okay, AI, buy a book for me. Well, fine, maybe I get the wrong book every now and then. Oh, okay, AI, write my will. Really? You really want to do that? Okay, AI, file my taxes. I mean, I don't know what the Irish tax authorities are like, but I can tell you for sure that the UK tax authorities will not accept AI did my tax return as a mistake, reason for getting it wrong. So we have to look at the potential level of problems. Now, that was all just about filling in the forms.
Yeah.
But when I'm saying that the user behavior of how they interact with the forms is also a crucial part of the way we design them. And so that's one aspect. Another aspect is to say, oh, well, okay, AI, just build me a form. All right, well, what form is it going to build? Is it going to ask useful questions? Is it going to ask questions people can answer? And I don't know. It might be. I mean, I'm hearing a lot from developer colleagues about the perils of vibe coding, let the AI code. And the answer is it will code something. Does it code robust, truly accessible, effective, maintainable code? No. No.
You still need, I would still say you need about 50% understanding of code to be able to really vibe code. It's something that I love to do in my spare time. I prototype with it. I'm always playing with that space, but like you can really code/design yourself into a corner, and then it just says, oh, I don't know what to do now. And then you're stuck. So it takes a lot of that early kind of flux out of your process, but it doesn't scale very nicely unless you're very, very careful or skillful about it. Can I ask you a little bit more around the topic that you spoke about in service design and gov? Because I know when I spoke to Martin in the German government, we were both kind of interested in total error across the sequence of a service. Where did this come from? Like, I know you were very much passionate about this. Your workshop was brilliant. Like, I myself and Mark went to it. We loved it. and Owen as well from Dublin City. We thought it was really, really good, and it got us thinking about an important metric to measure. And it's very often not included in a lot of those core metrics when I look within an organization. Why do you think organizations don't do it more? What's holding them back?
The workshop that I did was about error rates. Like, do we know our error rates and do we understand them? And that was partly as well because I feel that, to be fair, many organizations are looking to use AI in different ways. And there's an argument, I think, that says if we're going to be putting data into AI, we should probably try and give the AI the best chance of giving it decent quality data in the first place. If it's riddled with errors, chances are that's not going to improve the tendency for AI to create even more errors. So it's like, I'm hoping that the whole conversation about implementing AI will help people to think about what is the accuracy of our data like, what quality of data are we looking at. And so the workshop was really about getting people to think about what errors happen, why they happen, are we looking at error rates in our service, and is there a possibility of thinking about the total error across the service? And that partly came about because of something that Martin is head of design for the German government, and he put a post on socials out saying that measuring error rates would be a metric in German government, and I think that's fascinating.
Huge.
Because it's very difficult to get any sort of government metrics on any government service. In particular, I think error rates are quite a challenging one to measure. But that really got me thinking, and it got me thinking that I hadn't actually thought that much about errors in forms for really back in the day, around about year 2000, I was talking about error rates in data capture processes. And then I hadn't really thought about it much in between, apart from it turned out that there's a central concept in survey methodology called total survey error. So, which is about looking at all the sources of error in a survey and trying to minimize across all of them. So to encapsulate that, a lot of us might think about sampling error with surveys. Like when you ask a sample, there's an inherent mathematical sampling error built in. But there's also something called measurement error, which I would describe as asking the wrong question. And so, one of the things is that no matter how much you increase your sample size to reduce your sampling error, if you're asking the wrong question, it won't help you. Those are independent errors. So you've got to kind of balance the time. Like in a survey, don't put all your time into asking a ton of people. Put some of your time into thinking about whether you're asking correct questions. And so that whole total survey error thing also fed into why I was really thinking about errors. But I'm just going to put a quick advert in, if you don't mind.
Come on, stick an ad in.
I did an online version of the workshop for Lou Rosenfeld in the Rosenverse.
Give a plug there. Big up to Lou.
Big up for Lou, so if people want to get like a slightly different but an online version of the workshop, it's available. And I'm also repeating an online version of it at the Service Design in Government Virtual in March.
Class,
so come along.
I mean, Service Design in Gov is one of the best conferences. I don't want to harp on it. I absolutely love the team that put together those events. But I just want to come back to the error piece, okay, and total survey error. Depending on the Zoom level that you're looking at in an organization, what constitutes an error? Like asking the wrong question is pretty high up in the Zoom level versus a micro interaction where you might be able to track that. It's, maybe pre-populating something that it shouldn't be, or placeholder text, or isn't clearing. Walk me through errors and what falls into something that constitutes as moving the dial in the metric for total survey error. I'd like to understand that a little bit more. What gets tracked?
Well, let's look more at total service error rather than survey error.
Okay,
Let's look at services and experiences that we're designing. So our colleagues who work primarily in e-commerce, I don't know if that's you, but I do a bit of e-commerce, but it's not my main thing. So recently I've been working with an e-commerce business, and in e-commerce, they're a lot better than we are in government. My main thing is government.
Yeah.
That the e-commerce folks tend to be pretty good at tracking their conversion rates, which is another way of looking at it, to say how many people are on our website, how many people actually progress to buying. Yeah. So one of the ways of looking at it is to say how many people have we lost on the journey. E-commerce people tend to call that conversion rate. Elsewhere, we tend to call it completion rate. Like, did they start the process? Did they succeed? So that's one way of saying, where are people dropping out?
Yeah.
And are they dropping out because of their errors or our errors? Did they answer questions wrongly? At the moment, I'm thinking a lot about why people lie on forms, for example. So you might say, well, no one ever lies on forms. And like, everybody lies on forms. And the classic example is, did you actually read the terms and conditions? No, you did not. You just ticked the box, right?
How did you know? How did you know?
I've seen you filling in forms.
I knew. I thought I heard the door move when I knew you were here.
There you go. You see, so we've all done it. We've all met situations where
you know my dirty little secret.
Through.
Okay, exactly. I don't read the terms and conditions.
Some of us do, a few of us do, but I don't read them consistently for sure. You know.
Yeah.
And so we've got that kind of, how do we work with people's actual behaviour? All of those things. We've got problems like, one of the things that's very important for people in Ireland is many Irish people have got apostrophes in their names, like O'Connor.
And fathers as well.
Yeah, there you go. And
in Wales as well, they've got their own.
And so, you know, a lot of websites won't accept an apostrophe in someone's name.
That's right.
So then people are forced into giving a wrong answer. You know, so we can force people into lying by saying your name isn't valid. It's like, it's my name, it's you that's not valid.
Yeah.
You know, my screenshot library has an Irish airline rejecting someone's Irish name. Like, really, you should have done better.
I know, that's a huge thing.
So it's kind of understanding that just kind of interaction level. And I also have a rant about, don't ask people no questions with only have the answers yes and no. Because the real world is always more complicated. There's always some exception. There's some extra thing. Always have some other option. It might be other, it might be something else, or you have to work on the wording of the extra option. But you always want to have a further option. Nobody ever fills it in. After 5 years, take it away. But make sure you're designing for it. So that was one level of sort of scale that you asked. But the other one is like an outcomes level. Yeah, so just going back to e-commerce, did they actually deliver? You know, if I bought, like, from many of us do online shopping quite a bit. If I placed my order in the supermarket, did they actually deliver what I asked for?
Yeah.
Or not?
Huge thing. I've been saying this for a while.
Do you see what I mean? So it's kind of, every now and then, particularly in government, services will hit the headlines because there's been some tragically wrong outcome, you know. I don't know if you've heard, but we had a scandal recently which affected people in Northern Ireland a lot, where our tax authorities, bless them, decided that they would stop paying child benefit to people who'd left the country. Now, why did this affect people in Northern Ireland in particular? Is because what can happen is you can leave from Northern Ireland, and so let's say you fly from Northern Ireland to Paris, right? So there's a record that you've left, right? But for whatever reason, you decide to come back via Dublin. Well, there's no entry record because you've not come back. So now you've emigrated.
Wow.
Okay, so there were lots of ways it could affect people not in Northern Ireland, but that's just a very particular example.
To give any of our people in other parts of the world who don't understand the local politics, Ireland as an island is made up of two kind of countries, Northern Ireland and the Republic of Ireland. Depending on how you see things, it's the north of Ireland or the south of Ireland. But what happens is there's no border between those two entities. And as a result, you can enter in through Dublin and just drive up, and there's no border control. And it makes, that's because of the Good Friday Agreement, which we want peace in our country and our island. And as a result, it makes it much more difficult to track these because the systems don't speak to each other. Dublin is Ireland, the Republic of Ireland, and generally Northern Ireland is governed by the United Kingdom. So even though the Irish have a lot of say in Northern Ireland, still they're two separate systems.
Yeah. So you can imagine that like that was a
Huge
problem of outcomes, and in the end they've had to roll back the whole policy because it was basically not well thought through. But we can look at, well, what are the actual outcomes we're achieving, and that can. So in my workshop or on my website, I've developed a sort of 6 types of errors for people to think about. And that can be quite, I hope people might find that thought-provoking to say,
Where is that? Is that on your blog?
Yeah.
Is that the one that you did? Because I was on your website and I'm on it again here at the moment. When did you write that?
Last year.
May, was it? The total? Yeah, I see it here. So there's 6 error things and services to really focus on. And that's number 1, problems along the way. 2, wrong result. 3, unnecessary action. 4, delayed impact problem. 5, non-uptake or over uptake. And 6, technology problem. They're pretty decent. I'm going to put I say pretty decent. That sounds really rude.
It's all work.
I'm going to put a link to that into the show notes for this episode.
I'm trying to kind of, again, I'm hoping that this whole thing about AI and errors and so on can open some conversations, perhaps with me, but perhaps within organizations. I always, wherever I can, make all my slides, for example, Creative Commons. By all means, people help yourselves, run your own workshop, tell me if it worked or not, as the case may be.
Yeah, I love it.
But actually thinking about what is an error, how do we measure it, what are our error rates? Like, is this happening all the time? Often, for example, good old-fashioned technique of going and listening into your call center to find out what people are calling about. Do anybody still do that? We used to in the olden days, and it was incredibly instructive. I'm not hearing so much about it now.
Can I ask, like, obviously usability studies is an amazing way to find out how people are using your product and your service. But generally speaking, are you seeing more organizations tracking the failure at the micro interaction of forms? So like the failures of how many times they click, next and an error pops up. Is that something that's been measured? Are you seeing?
As I say, our e-commerce colleagues are better at that.
Yeah.
It's quite common for e-commerce people to be looking pretty closely at that sort of stuff. And I mean, one of the books on the shelf behind me is Erin Wiegel's book about A/B testing. In e-commerce, it's much more common to do e-commerce testing and look to see whether that's improving conversion rates, which is the same as reducing error rates, really.
Yeah.
In service design and other things, not so much. Broadly speaking, from my workshop experiences last year, I'd say that probably only a third of people had any idea what their error rates might be.
Yeah.
Now, I don't want to cast any shade on that because, as I say, I hadn't thought much about error rates for about 20 years. So why would I expect anybody else to, really?
Yeah.
But I'm hoping that kind of getting that out in the open a bit will encourage us all to do a bit more measuring and a bit more thinking about it.
But to measure, what are the implements that we need to use to find the errors more effectively, I guess, is a better way of looking at the question. Is it through asynchronous kind of Google Analytics type services, or are you seeing just more of an increase of a manual usability of design research kind of approach to determining the metric? How do you see it being used?
Well, those things, yes, and one of the ways of finding out where, for example, people might be forced into wrong answers is your classic usability test, where you watch people use it. Yeah. Your analytics, where are you getting dropout rates, and what, trying to figure out why. Like, the analytics might tell you where people are dropping out, but they won't tell you why they're dropping out. You've got to do that another way. There's your as I mentioned, classic observational work of going and listening in or watching how many calls are coming into your call center and what they're about.
Yeah.
Remembering that call center staff are rewarded on answering the calls, not on analyzing why people are calling. You've got to do that for them. And I found that attempts to get call center people to record the purpose of the call are generally not very successful, that they don't really have time to be that analytical about it. It's much better to actually go and do some observation, find that yourself. But just knowing what the volumes are, actually knowing what the volumes are is important. Like how many people are using your thing compared to the number of people who ought to be using it. You know, what's your take-up rate? How many people are using paper compared to digital, for example, and why? That can be very instructive. Like people being forced back into paper even though they don't want to be.
Yeah.
There's so actually looking at units that you've sold, you know,
Yeah,
like
absolutely.
in e-commerce, or how many of this thing have you sent out? What have you delivered? So there's kind of higher level things that you can do.
Sure. I've got a question for you that I wanted to ask in Edinburgh. Okay, when we were hanging out, like, you know, going for dinner and going for drinkies. And that was, the title of your workshop was Garbage In, Garbage Out. Okay, right. Now, I sometimes use a different way of saying that. But generally speaking, when the listeners are looking at that and saying garbage in, garbage out, how do they know if they've got garbage in the first place?
Well, I guess
in their data is what I'm talking about.
In the data. So, you know,
and just to cut across it, the reason why I think that's so important as a question is because most of the designers are like, we know we've got crap data. We know it's in there at the moment. But the other side of the organization may say, it's fine. Let's rush towards jumping into bed with AI, jumping into bed with all of these things and say, well, we're not set up for it yet.
I think it's been very interesting that there are things like there's a government data quality framework, for example, in the UK.
Yeah.
Other government initiatives. So the Centre for Digital Public Government. I'm sorry, I've got the name slightly wrong, but the Welsh equivalent of our UK gov.uk has got a very interesting thing about getting ready for AI, which says, you know, you've got to make sure your data is accurate. But I'm not seeing that much advice about how do you do that. I think looking at the data, for me, when I think about is my data accurate, I think about it very much in terms of getting my data set, which I would normally be doing in survey design. Like in survey design, you have your responses and there's your data set and you can start cleaning it.
Yeah.
Or anyone working in statistics will talk about, genuinely working in statistics, will talk about looking at the data set and cleaning it. So where you're looking for things like, have you got missing entries? Have you got duplicated entries? Have you got inconsistent entries? To see whether the data is coherent with itself and perhaps coherent with other sources. You try matching. Anyone who's tried data matching of two different data sets will know the fun and games that they never match nearly as well as you hope. You've got duplicate entries, you've got missing entries, you've got all sorts of stuff at the data level. And there's no real substitute for actually interrogating it, like pulling some records, looking at some customer records, looking at things like outliers. You know, how many customers in your database have got a date of birth, if you record that, of January 1900? You know, how many people are over 120 years old?
Yeah.
How many people are under 5, even though they seem to be a current customer? All those sorts of things. You can start to. It's hard work. I mean, I'll tell you, the data scientists earn their money.
I know.
And if you're not quite sure how to go about it, see if you can find a data scientist or a statistician to help you.
Yeah.
Or just sit there and think about it. You know, does this make sense? Does this line up with that? What's going on here?
Yeah. Okay. So for a lot of designers out there, and I know I'm coaching a few at the moment who are having those conversations, they say, well, we just don't have accurate data and in our kind of reach. And all of a sudden one part of the organization is, using agentic AI, and they're like, man, if they start to implement that over here, we're in a fast road to failure, And it's a challenge for a lot of people at the moment, trying to balance those conversations where there's different cadences happening within the organization. So with the garbage in, garbage out kind of stuff, that conversation is ongoing, and I'm really happy to hear given some sort of details on what we can do about it.
One of the tips for those of us, I mean, although I've, my degree is in mathematics, so you'd think I could understand numbers, but I actually have mild dyscalculia. I'm not good with actual numbers. I like patterns. And so I think I think that's pretty common in designers, is that we're more comfortable with visualizations than with the actual numbers. So a real tip from that is try getting hold of some data and draw some graphs and charts and see if you can spot anomalies in that.
That's nice.
Because I'm far more comfortable with, okay, if I graph, I have an example where I was working with a survey where I looked at people answering how many children have you got at different ages, and it should be fairly consistent. Like if you have the children by age, you should have roughly similar numbers. And then I looked at it, and there was a big spike at over 18. And I realised that we were asking people if they had children over 18, right? Which is, many of us, our parents still consider us to be their children, even though we're grown up. So that was capturing everyone who'd ever had a child.
Yeah.
Assuming rather than 18 to 21 year or whatever it was. So I had a big spike, and that made me realise I had a problem. So
that's
that's
the wrong
a sort
question.
of thing where, for many of us who are much more visual, we can feel much more comfortable with a chart or a graph or something that is a more visual thing of representing our data.
Yeah.
And then even asking ourselves the question of, how would I represent this data in a chart, helps us to get to grips with it.
That's a really, really good way of finding out if your data is actually a bit dead. And I love that. It always comes back to visualization for me, being able to visualize what you've got. I'm such a visual person, which is why a lot of the stuff that you're speaking about here really makes sense, and I love it. Caroline, you're so interesting, and I mean that in a possible way. And I mean, I had that as well when we first connected over dinner. There was a bunch of us. I was like, you had me thinking. And that's usually the sign of somebody who's got a lot of wisdom in there. Your books, you've got 2 books, isn't that right?
I've got
probably 3, is it?
I mean, I'll go the other way. We've talked about Forms That Work, which I co-authored with Gerry Gaffney.
Yeah.
We've talked a bit about Surveys That Work, which was just me.
Sure.
Published by my pal Lou Rosenfeld Media.
Yeah.
And then the other one is called User Interface Design and Evaluation, which was a textbook that it came out of an Open University course. It's a little old. You can still get it. You can still get it secondhand, frankly.
$3,000 a book or something like that, though, Caroline. Let's be honest.
It's widely available. It's a textbook.
Once they go out of publications, it gets pretty kind of gnarly to try and find the book at a reasonable price.
Yeah, I don't get any money from that book. Any royalties go to the Open University, so buy it where you like. In fact, buy all of them where you like. I don't mind. Read it. I don't care.
Yeah.
Obviously, I'd much rather, if you buy the survey book, buy it from the publisher, because my publisher's lovely and they get a bit more money that way.
Yeah.
Forms That Work is published by Elsevier, which is sort of evil empire. So buy that wherever you like. I don't care.
God, you're waving a lightsaber here, and you're just taking everybody out in the final parts of this podcast.
I guess the User Interface Design and Evaluation book, we really wrote that in the late end of the 1990s, and then we edited it in the 2000s. So some of the stuff is kind of old-fashioned. There's a lot about requirements, which we don't really do anymore. We now work in an agile way. But there's some chapters at the back about how to persuade people to do this stuff, which actually I'm quite proud of because I wrote. And I think they still have a value, that we still have a situation where many of us are confronted with, well, how do I persuade people to do this?
Yeah.
To look at user experience. And so that brings together the thread of the garbage in, garbage out idea, is to say, well, how do we persuade people to look at the data quality they have? Well, if I say to you, I think you should look at your data quality, it's like, boring. If I say, you're thinking of doing some AI, maybe looking at your data quality will give you better results from that. It's like,
absolutely.
Yeah, okay, I can see a point. So we can sort of, I hope, use AI to crack that open.
I know,
absolutely. And so that kind of persuasive thing, how do we persuade people to be interested? I think there's still some value in that from the book.
100%. Just going back to your books. Just going back to your books. There was one last book that we didn't mention. That's Surveys That Work on Rosenfeld.
Yeah.
And there's no lightsaber treatment for that organization.
No, Lou's
encouraging you to go and buy in Rosenfeld. Look, I'm doing your job here for you. Go and buy Surveys That Work on Rosenfeld. They produce brilliant books, have done, and they continue to do so. And I'll put a link to that book into the show notes as well, Caroline.
Yeah, but also, I try and publish a lot of stuff on my website.
Yeah, I'm just looking at it. It's amazing.
Feel welcome to, don't feel you have to buy a book. Just, I hope you'll find something useful on the website. And if you don't, then write to me, because a primary important thing for me at the moment is refreshing and bringing my website up to date. So
I love it.
Please feel welcome. Write to me. Link up with me on LinkedIn, or I do Blue Sky. Ask me questions, and that will, I hope, provoke me into actually writing some of the 150 blog posts that are in my queue that I haven't quite managed to write yet.
Yeah, no, you're brilliant. Caroline, I'm going to put a link to your LinkedIn in there for people to connect with you. And I'll put a link to your website as well, because as you said, it's a great repository of everything that you've done in your career so far. It's been an absolute pleasure speaking with you.
Oh, thank you.
Not just today, but also like when we got to hang out quite a bit in Edinburgh. I really, really enjoyed it. And I messaged Gerry to say what a joy it was to get to hang out and learn all about the way you think and the way you've operated and your career and the large body of work. You've really helped the design practice grow over the last 20, 30 years in particular. So thank you on behalf of everyone else for all that work. Thanks so much again, folks, for listening. I hope you enjoyed Caroline. Again, check out our website, buy the books, and hopefully, Caroline, we'll get to speak to each other soon.
I'd love that. Thank you so much. I really appreciate the opportunity.